The observation post-DR. Kestalvin had spent 10 years studying humans, and in all that time, he had never been afraid of them. Fear was not something the Zentari understood well anyway. His species had evolved past conflict 3,000 years ago, choosing instead the path of knowledge, observation, and peaceful coexistence. Violence was a primitive remnant, an evolutionary dead end that civilized species outgrew. Humans were fascinating precisely because they seemed to be on that same journey, leaving behind their warlike past to build something better among the stars. Kes watched them from his observation post on the edge of human colony designated as New Haven. The settlement sprawled across a green valley, modest buildings interspersed with agricultural fields and solar arrays. 2,000 humans lived here, farming, teaching, building families far from Earth. They grew vegetables in greenhouses, played music in the evenings, and sent their children to schools where they learned mathematics and art. This was humanity at its best, Kes believed, the gentle face of a species learning to be better. His research facility sat on a nearby hillside, a modest dome filled with monitoring equipment and data archives. The Zentari Council funded his work generously because understanding humanity mattered. Humans were spreading across the galaxy quickly, establishing colonies, forming trade relationships, building alliances. They were young as spacefaring civilizations went, but they had potential. Kes's job was to document their cultural evolution, to track their progress toward true civilization. The attack came on a Tuesday morning. Though Kes would not learn this detail until later, humans marked time strangely, dividing their planetary rotation into named segments as if naming something gave them control over it. He was reviewing recordings of a human harvest festival when the alarms screamed across every communication channel. The sound cut through his concentration like a blade. Proximity alert. Multiple unauthorized vessels entering system. Classification: hostile. All personnel initiate evacuation protocols immediately. Kes's 3 fingers trembled as he activated the visual feeds. Ships were dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge. Dozens of them, dark and angular with weapon ports already glowing hot. He recognized the design from intelligence briefings. Ravagers. Pirates who preyed on isolated colonies, stripping them of resources and selling survivors into labor contracts that were slavery by another name. They were known for brutality, for making examples of settlements that resisted. The evacuation order made sense. Kes gathered his essential research data, uploading everything to secure storage while physical copies loaded onto portable drives. His transport shuttle would be ready at the facility's landing pad. Protocol was clear. Observers did not interfere, did not stay, did not become part of the events they documented. He would leave, file his reports from a safe distance, and perhaps return later to study the aftermath. He was halfway to the landing pad, and the first impact shook the facility. Defensive satellites were being destroyed, their brief flares visible even through the dome's polarized windows. The colony's shields flickered and failed. Ravager dropships were entering atmosphere, sleek predatory shapes diving toward the valley below. Kes ran faster, his long legs covering ground in loping strides that his people had evolved for fleeing danger rather than confronting it. The transport shuttle was gone. The landing pad stood empty except for scorch marks where the craft had been. Someone must have taken it already, or perhaps it had been destroyed in the initial attack. Kes stood there, breathing hard, his mind refusing to process what this meant. He was stranded. The facility had no other transport, no way off this world until rescue arrived. Rescue could take days. An explosion bloomed in the valley below. The Ravagers were landing, and they were not being careful about it. Kes could see figures moving in the colony now, people running, trying to reach shelter or escape vehicles. Some would make it. Many would not. He turned away, unwilling to watch what came next. His research had not prepared him for this. He studied culture and art, philosophy and social structures. He did not study war. The communication panel in his observation room crackled to life. "This is Sarah Okonkwo from New Haven Engineering. Any Zentari personnel still in the research facility? We're opening our emergency bunker to everyone." Follow the ridge path east for 2 kilometers. Look for the entrance marked with orange paint. Move quickly. They're coming. Kes hesitated only a moment. Pride suggested he should stay in his facility, wait for Zentari rescue, maintain proper observational distance. Survival instinct, that ancient thing that even his peaceful people still possessed, told him to run. He ran. The ridge path was steep and narrow, carved into the hillside for maintenance access to underground infrastructure. Kes struggled down it, his robes catching on rocks, his breathing labored. Behind him, he heard the sound of aircraft, the heavy thrum of Ravager gunships searching for targets. He pressed himself against the cliff face as one passed overhead, its weapons scanning for movement. It did not see him. Perhaps his luck had not entirely abandoned him. The bunker entrance was exactly where the human had said it would be. A heavy door set into reinforced concrete with a hasty orange stripe painted across it. Kes pounded on the metal, his 3-fingered hands making dull thumps that seemed inadequate against the chaos erupting across the valley. The door opened immediately. A human woman, dark-skinned and compact with engineer's coveralls and worried eyes, pulled him inside. You made it. Good, I'm Sarah. Come on. We're sealing up. The bunker was larger than Kes expected. A rectangular space lined with storage containers and emergency supplies. 47 people crowded inside, he counted automatically. 31 humans, 16 Zentari, all civilians from the research exchange program. No soldiers, no security personnel, no one trained for combat. Children huddled against their parents, human and Zentari both. Their eyes wide with fear that transcended species, Sarah sealed the door with a heavy mechanical lock, then turned to face the gathered crowd. Her voice was steady despite everything, carrying authority that Kes had not expected from a colony engineer. All right, everyone, listen up. The Ravagers have taken the main settlement. Our security team tried to hold them, but they were overwhelmed in the first 10 minutes. We're cut off from the spaceport and all functioning spacecraft. Communication arrays are down. We sent a distress signal before losing connection. But response time for military assistance is minimum 72 hours. 72 hours. 3 days. The Zentari in the bunker made sounds of distress, their throat pouches inflating and deflating rapidly, a sign of extreme anxiety. Kes felt his own pouch fluttering. 3 days was an eternity when hostile forces controlled everything above ground. A human man spoke up, his accent marking him as from Earth's Asian regions. Marcus Chen, Kes, remembered from his research files. A botanist who had published extensively on adapting Earth crops to alien soil compositions. How long can we last down here? Food, water, air? Sarah pulled up a data pad, her fingers moving quickly across its surface. Water recycling can support us for 2 weeks if we're careful. Food is the problem. We have enough rations for maybe 5 days at survival portions. Air is not an issue. The bunker's environmental systems are robust and have independent power. What about them? Another human, younger, wearing a teacher's informal clothes. What do the Ravagers want? Will they just take what they need and leave? Sarah's expression darkened. Ravagers don't leave witnesses. They'll strip everything of value from the colony, and anyone they find will be taken for labor sales or killed if they resist. We're only safe as long as they don't know we're here. The bunker fell silent. Kes looked around at the faces surrounding him, human and Zentari, and saw the same fear reflected in all of them. But something was different in the human faces. Beneath the fear, something else was stirring. He could not name it yet, but he could see it in the way their jaws set, the way their eyes moved, assessing, calculating, planning. Sarah spoke again, and now Kes heard steel in her voice. We have advantages. This bunker connects to the colony's maintenance tunnel system. We can move through the underground infrastructure, access supply caches, monitor what's happening above. We're not trapped down here. We're positioned. Positioned for what? A Zentari scientist asked the question Kes was thinking. We are researchers, not warriors. What can we possibly do against armed raiders? Sarah looked at the Zentari, and Kes saw something in her expression, that made his throat pouch flutter again. Not aggression, not anger, but determination that felt almost physical in its intensity. We survive. We protect each other. And if we get the chance, we make them regret coming here. The words should have sounded absurd, coming from a civilian engineer surrounded by farmers and teachers and scientists. But something in the way Sarah said them, in the way the other humans nodded, made Kes believe she meant every word. More than that, it made him believe they might actually be capable of it. A human man with graying hair and maintenance workers' patches on his jacket moved to stand beside Sarah. David Kim, Kes identified him. Facility maintenance supervisor. I can rig up communications if we can tap into any surviving hardline connections. Maybe get us visual feeds of what's happening topside. Marcus Chen stepped forward as well. The greenhouse sections have separate environmental controls. If the Ravagers try to come through the maintenance tunnels, we could use atmospheric controls as a defense. Nitrogen displacement, CO2 flooding, not lethal, but enough to slow them down. Alina Vasquez, the teacher, was already organizing the children, Human and Zentari, together, moving them to the bunker's far corner where sleeping mats were stored. She spoke softly, her voice carrying a calm that seemed impossible given the circumstances. We're going to play the quiet game, okay? The best quiet game ever. Whoever stays quietest longest gets. First pick of dessert rations. Later, Kes watched this transformation with academic fascination that was rapidly becoming something more like awe. Minutes ago, these had been terrified civilians facing impossible odds. Now they were organizing, adapting, turning their everyday skills into survival tools. The engineer became a tactical coordinator. The maintenance worker became a technical specialist. The botanist became a defensive strategist. The teacher became a protector of the young. This was not what his research had prepared him for. His files documented human poetry, their music, their philosophical traditions, their capacity for compassion and creativity. He had read about their history, certainly, the wars and conflicts that had marked their development. But those were presented as things they had overcome, evolutionary baggage they were learning to discard. Looking at Sarah's face now, at the quiet determination settling over every human in the bunker, Kes realized his research had been dangerously incomplete. The first day passed in tense silence. David managed to tap into a maintenance camera network, giving them limited views of the colony above. What Kes saw made his 3 hearts beat irregularly. The Ravagers had established a command post in the colony's central square, their ships forming a perimeter. They were methodically looting every building, their movements efficient and practiced. This was not their first raid. Sarah organized the humans and willing Zentari into watch rotations, ensuring someone was always monitoring the feeds, always listening for sounds of approach. She rationed the food carefully, making sure everyone got equal shares regardless of size or species. When a Zentari child cried from hunger, Alina shared part of her own ration, insisting she had eaten enough. Kes tried to help, but his assistance felt inadequate. He could monitor screens, but his 3-fingered hands were not suited for the technical work David performed. He could comfort frightened Zentari, but his words felt hollow compared to Elena's natural empathy. He was an observer, trained to document and analyze, not to act or contribute. For the first time in his academic career, Kes felt useless. On the second day, everything changed. The maintenance camera caught movement in the tunnel system. Ravagers with scanning equipment searching the underground infrastructure. They were looking for survivors, for hiding places, for anyone who had escaped their initial sweep. The bunker's location would not stay secret much longer. Sarah gathered everyone in the center of the space, her voice low but clear. They're coming. We knew they would eventually. Here's what we're going to do. What she outlined was not a defense plan. It was a trap. Marcus would use the greenhouse environmental controls to flood approach tunnels with nitrogen, slowing the raiders and forcing them to route through specific passages. David would rig motion sensors to give early warning and disable lighting in key sections, creating confusion. Sarah herself would lead a small group to position makeshift barricades that would funnel any attackers into killing zones where superior numbers would not matter as much. This is insane. A Zentari administrator, older than Kes, with faded crest feathers, spoke what many were thinking. We should negotiate, offer them what they want. Plead for mercy. Sarah turned to face him. And Kes saw something in her eyes that made him understand why humans had once been apex predators on their violent homeworld. Ravagers don't do mercy. They don't negotiate. They take everything and everyone. The only choice we have is whether we make it easy for them or whether we fight. The Zentari administrator deflated, his throat pouch sagging. Fighting goes against everything we believe. Violence is not the answer to violence. Maybe not. Sarah's voice softened slightly. But sometimes violence is the only question that matters. The answer is whether you protect those who can't protect themselves. You don't have to fight. Stay with the children. Keep them calm. That's important too. But don't tell me I'm wrong for defending them. Kes found himself nodding, though the gesture felt alien to his species' body language. Sarah was right. His people had the luxury of pacifism because someone else always did the violence necessary to maintain peace. The Zentari had not evolved past conflict. They had simply delegated it, made it someone else's problem, and called themselves civilized for not getting their own hands dirty. The trap was sprung 6 hours later. The Ravagers came through the Western Maintenance Tunnel. 4 of them in light armor, with energy weapons that could cut through the bunker door in minutes. They never made it that far. Marcus flooded the approach tunnel with nitrogen, forcing them to switch to internal air supplies and slowing their advance. David's motion sensors gave warning, allowing Sarah's group to get into position. When the lights died and the Ravagers entered the kill zone, the humans hit them from 3 sides with whatever weapons they had improvised. Kes watched the camera feeds, unable to look away despite his horror. This was not the clumsy violence of panicked civilians. The humans moved with precision, each action purposeful and coordinated. Sarah used a heavy pipe to strike the lead Ravager's weapon hand, forcing him to drop his gun, while Marcus swept his legs from behind. They worked together like they had trained for this, though Kes knew they had not. Another human, a farmer named James, tackled a Ravager around the waist, bringing him down where Alina could disable him with a shock from a repurposed electrical tool. It was over in 90 seconds. For Ravagers unconscious or incapacitated, 0 human casualties. Sarah immediately ordered the raiders' weapons secured and their communications equipment destroyed. Then she did something that made Kes's throat pouch inflate with confusion. She ordered their injuries treated. Alina, who had been a teacher hours ago and a combatant minutes ago, became a medic, carefully bandaging a Ravager's broken arm and checking another for concussion. Why? Kes asked the question aloud, unable to contain it. Why waste resources on enemies who would kill you without hesitation? Sarah looked at him, and her expression was impossible to read. Because the moment we start treating people as less than people, we become what they are. We fight when we have to, but we don't lose ourselves in the fighting. The words made no logical sense. Yet Kes found himself recording them, adding them to his research notes with trembling fingers. He was watching something his academic training had not equipped him to understand. These humans could switch between gentleness and violence and heartbeats, could fight with lethal efficiency, and then care for the wounded enemies. Could be both predator and protector simultaneously. It was not that they had 2 natures. It was that their nature encompassed both, seamlessly integrated into something his species had never achieved. The Ravagers above ground knew their scouting team had been lost. More would come, better prepared, more heavily armed. Sarah knew this too. Kes could see it in the way she studied the tunnel maps, in the calculations behind her eyes. They had won 1 fight, but the war was just beginning that night. While others slept or tried to, Kes sat with his data pad and tried to write his observations. The words came slowly, inadequately. He had studied humans for 10 years and understood nothing. Everything he had documented, the art and music and philosophy, was true. But it was only half the truth. The other half was here in this bunker, in the way Sarah planned defenses while ensuring children got extra rations. In the way Marcus could discuss optimal growing conditions and optimal ambush points with equal expertise. In the way Alina could sing lullabies and disable armed raiders. In the way David could fix environmental systems and rig improvised weapons. Humans were not becoming civilized, despite their capacity for violence. Their civilization included that capacity, acknowledged it, trained for it, and then chose when to use it. That was the part his research had missed. The choice. The conscious, deliberate decision to be gentle when they could be brutal, to protect when they could take, to heal when they could harm. Kes looked at Sarah, who sat by the camera monitors on first watch, her eyes scanning for threats, while one hand absently sketched something on a scrap of paper. Later, Kes would see it was a drawing of the valley as it had been before the attack, green and peaceful and beautiful. She was documenting what they were fighting to preserve, even as she planned how to fight. For the first time in 10 years of studying humanity, Dr. Kes Talvan was afraid. Not of what humans might do to him. He felt safer in this bunker than he had in his comfortable observation post. He was afraid of what understanding them truly meant, of what their example demanded from species like his own, of the uncomfortable truth that civilization might require not the absence of violence, but the wisdom of when to use it. The Zentari had thought themselves evolved beyond such primitive considerations. Watching Sarah return to her sketch, adding details to preserve memory against the chaos outside, Kes wondered if his people had simply been hiding from a truth that humans had the courage to face. Perhaps that was the real difference. Not that humans were more violent, but that they were more honest about what survival sometimes required, and more determined to preserve their humanity despite it. The long night, the third day, brought a kind of terrible routine to life in the bunker. Sarah had established watch rotations, supply distribution schedules, and contingency plans for a dozen different scenarios. The humans adapted to this structure naturally, as if some instinct told them that order was the bulwark against chaos. The Zentari, Kes included, followed along with less certainty, their pacifist philosophy offering no framework for organized resistance. Marcus. Chen had transformed the greenhouse tunnel connections into a defensive maze. Kes watched him work, fascinated by the precision with which the botanist calculated gas dispersal rates and pressure differentials. This was the same man who had published papers on the poetry of plant growth cycles, who had once spent 20 minutes explaining to Kes why flowers mattered to human psychology. Now he discussed killing zones and atmospheric displacement with clinical detachment. You seem troubled. Marcus appeared beside Kes at the monitoring station, his voice soft enough not to disturb others. Kes gestured at the screens, showing Marcus's modifications to the tunnel system. I studied your work on adaptive agriculture. Your thesis argued that humans succeed because they work with nature rather than against it. This seems contrary to that philosophy. Marcus smiled, though it carried sadness. Not contrary, complementary. Working with nature means understanding that nature includes predators and prey, growth and decay, creation and destruction. Plants compete for sunlight, strangle competitors, deploy chemical weapons. We learned from them. The greenhouse isn't peaceful because plants are gentle. It's peaceful because we manage the violence nature would inflict if left uncontrolled. The explanation made Kes's throat pouch flutter with discomfort. His people preferred to believe nature was harmonious, that violence was aberration rather than foundation. But he had seen Earth's documentaries, knew that human evolution had occurred in an environment of constant predation and competition. Perhaps that history had taught them things the Zentari had never needed to learn. David Kim interrupted their conversation, his voice urgent but controlled. Movement on the northern perimeter? Looks like a larger force, maybe 20 Ravagers. They're setting up equipment, probably preparing for a serious assault on our position. Sarah moved to the screens immediately. Her engineer's eye assessing the situation. They found us. We knew they would. How long until they breach? For hours, maybe 5 if Marcus's atmospheric tricks slow them down. David's fingers moved across his improvised control panel. I can blow some maintenance junctions, force them to cut through structural barriers. That'll buy us time. Time for what? The Zentari administrator from before, still skeptical despite everything. We cannot fight 20 armed raiders. This is suicide. Sarah turned to face the gathering crowd. Human and Zentari both. You're right. We can't win a straight fight. But we don't need to win. We need to survive long enough for rescue to arrive. Make them pay for every meter of tunnel. Make it costly enough that they give up or get sloppy. Every hour we hold is an hour closer to military response. A human woman spoke up, younger, one of the colony teachers. What if rescue doesn't come in time? What if we're counting on help that never arrives? Then we go down fighting. Sarah's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. But we go down protecting our kids, both human and Zentari. We go down knowing we did everything we could. That has to be enough. Kes saw heads nodding, human and some Zentari too. Fear was still present. He could see it in every face, but it was being channeled into something else. Purpose, perhaps determination. The humans especially seemed to draw strength from Sarah's words. As if being given permission to fight was itself a kind of relief. Alina, Foskas had gathered the children in the bunker's far corner. Where sleeping areas had been converted into a makeshift schoolroom, she was teaching them songs, human and Zentari, blending melodies from different worlds into something new. The children sang with enthusiasm despite the circumstances, their young voices creating beauty in a place designed only for survival. Kes found himself drawn to watch, his academic curiosity overcoming fear. Why music? He asked Alina during a break between songs. In a crisis, why teach singing? Alina looked at him with eyes that had seen too much in too little time. Because they need to remember they're more than just scared. Music reminds us we're human, that we're Zentari, that we're people with cultures and identities beyond just survivors. If we lose that, what are we fighting to preserve? The logic was circular but somehow compelling. Humans fought to protect their humanity and maintained their humanity through acts that seemed impractical during crisis. Music, art, compassion for enemies, equal distribution of resources. These were not survival strategies in any tactical sense, yet the humans treated them as essential. Kes added more notes to his research file, though he knew his academic framework was inadequate for understanding what he was witnessing. The assault came in the early hours of the fourth day. 23 Ravagers, by David's count, equipped with cutting tools and heavy weapons. They breached the outer perimeter exactly where Sarah had predicted they would, following the path of least resistance that Sarah had deliberately left open. Marcus's nitrogen traps slowed them, forced them to route through secondary passages where David's sensor network tracked. Every movement, Kes watched from the monitoring station as the humans prepared. They had divided into 3 teams. Sarah led the primary defense at the bunker entrance. Marcus commanded environmental controls from a secondary position. David coordinated communications and maintained their early warning systems. Alina stayed with the children and non-combatants, but Kes noticed she had equipped herself with improvised weapons too. Every adult human had a role, a position, a purpose. The Zentari tried to help, but their contributions felt token compared to human efficiency. An older Zentari scientist named Vess managed the medical supplies under Elena's direction. A younger one helped David with monitoring equipment, though his 3 fingers struggled with controls designed for human hands. Kes himself could only watch and document, feeling more useless with each passing minute. The first Ravager team hit Marcus's gas traps and retreated, choking and disoriented. The second team came equipped with rebreathers and made it further before. David triggered corridor lighting failures that left them stumbling in darkness. The humans, who had practiced movement in the tunnels for 3 days, knew every turn and obstacle by touch. The Raiders did not. What Kes witnessed next would become the centerpiece of his later testimony. The moment that shattered his understanding of human nature completely. A Ravager team breached a secondary tunnel and captured 2 Zentari scientists who had been attempting to reach an auxiliary supply cache. Kes saw it happen on the monitors, saw the terrified Zentari surrounded by armed raiders, saw weapons raised for execution. The logical response was to seal that tunnel, prevent the raiders from using captured prisoners as leverage. Sarah could have given that order. Every tactical manual would have said it was the correct choice. She did not give that order. Instead, she looked at the human faces around her and said simply, "We get them back." The Zentari administrator's voice rose in protest. That is illogical. Trading certain safety for probable death. We cannot ask humans to die for us. We're not asking. Sarah's tone left no room for argument. Those are people under our protection. We don't leave people behind. That's not negotiable. Marcus spoke up from his position. The environmental systems in that section can create cover. Heavy mist, reduced visibility. Levels the playing field. David was already working. I can route backup power to give them a navigation advantage. Directional lighting? Subtle but enough if you know what to look for. Sarah nodded. 3 minutes to prepare. James, Michael, you're with me? We go in fast, extract our people, and fall back before they can organize a response. No heroes, no unnecessary risks. Get in, get them, get out. Kess wanted to protest, to argue that this violated every principle of rational crisis management. But he had learned enough about humans in the past 3 days to know that rational crisis management was not what they were doing. They were doing something else, something his species had no word for. They were choosing to risk themselves for others with nothing to gain and everything to lose, calling it non-negotiable. The rescue took 7 minutes. Sarah's team used Marcus's mist and David's lighting to approach unseen, struck the Ravager positions from unexpected angles, and extracted the 2 Zentari scientists, along with their captors' weapons. One human, Michael, took a glancing energy blast to the shoulder, but kept moving. They were back in secured territory before the Ravagers fully understood what had happened. Elena treated Michael's burn immediately, her hands steady despite the severity of the wound. The 2 rescued Zentari scientists were unharmed, trembling with shock, but alive. Sarah ordered them given food and water first, before the rescue team ate. Though the rescuers had burned more energy and taken more risk. Later, when the immediate crisis had passed and wounded were stable, Kess approached Sarah at her watchpost. She looked exhausted, blood on her coveralls from Michael's injury. Her eyes rimmed with red from 3 days of inadequate sleep. Why? Kess asked, keeping his voice low. By any logical calculation, that rescue was inadvisable. You risked 3 lives for 2, potentially compromised our position, used resources we cannot replace. Why? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the monitors without really seeing them. My grandfather was a soldier. He told me once about a mission that went bad, about being trapped behind enemy lines with a wounded friend. Command told him to leave the friend behind. That extraction wasn't worth the risk. He went back anyway. Lost 2 fingers and part of his lung getting that friend out. She held up her right hand, showing Kess 4 fingers instead of 5. He never regretted it. Said that the day he could watch someone die, because saving them was tactically inadvisable, was the day he stopped being the person he wanted to be. We become who we are through the choices we make when everything is terrible. I choose to be someone who goes back. The Zentari administrator, Kess, learned his name was Tyrion, had been listening. He approached with visible discomfort, his throat pouch contracting in the Zentari gesture of apology. I was wrong to protest. You risked yourselves for us when our own philosophy of nonviolence offers us no tools to save even our own people. I do not understand how you can be both so gentle and so dangerous, but I am grateful. Sarah's expression softened. We're not that complicated. We just think everyone deserves a chance to go home. Even people we just met. Even people who are different from us. That's not complicated. That's just being decent. Kess recorded this exchange, but his notes felt inadequate. Humans called it just being decent to risk death for strangers. They made it sound simple, obvious, when it was anything but. The Zentari had philosophized for 3,000 years. It's about the nature of civilization and had never arrived at the conclusion that protecting others might require becoming dangerous yourself. Humans seemed to know this instinctively, carried it in their bones like genetic memory. The 4th day brought a development that changed everything. David picked up a signal, faint but unmistakable, from the colony's wrecked communication array. Someone had managed to repair part of the system, was broadcasting a distress signal on military frequencies. The message was simple. New Haven under siege. Survivors present request immediate extraction. The broadcast location was the colony's central tower, firmly in Ravager-controlled territory. Sarah pulled up the structural plans, studying them with an intensity that made Kess nervous. He had learned to recognize that expression. It meant she was planning something that would terrify everyone who heard it. Whoever's broadcasting is keeping that signal going manually. Sarah spoke to the gathered group. The system's too damaged for automation. That means someone is sitting up there, exposed, maintaining communications despite being surrounded by Hoets. We should tell them to stop. Tren's voice was reasonable, logical. They're drawing attention to themselves. Better to stay hidden until rescue arrives. Sarah shook her head. That signal is cutting days off potential rescue time. Military response times improved dramatically with active communication and confirmed survivor presence. Whoever's up there is doing more to save us than anything we've accomplished down here. So what do we do? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. We make sure they can keep broadcasting. Sarah's finger traced a route on the structural display. There's a maintenance tunnel that runs within 50 meters of the tower base. We can establish a supply line, get them food, water, fresh power cells. Maybe even extract them if the situation deteriorates. That's insane. TRN was not alone in his protest this time. Several Zentari and even some humans looked skeptical. You want to risk people reaching someone we don't even know who might not even be alive by the time we get there. I want to make sure someone who's risking everything to save us knows they're not alone. Sarah's voice was firm. That they're not abandoned. That we see them and we value what they're doing. That's not negotiable either. The mission was planned for the next night's cycle, when Ravager patrols were lightest. Sarah would lead with 2 volunteers, Marcus and a human colonist named Rivera. They would take supplies sufficient for a week, weapons for defense, but not offense, and communication equipment to establish secure contact with the broadcaster. Kess found himself volunteering before he fully processed the decision. I should go. Every head turned toward him. Sarah's expression was unreadable. You're not trained for this. It's dangerous, probably more dangerous than anything we've done so far. I am a researcher. Kess's throat pouch fluttered with fear, but his voice stayed steady. I document human behavior. If I am to truly understand humans, I cannot only observe from safety. I must see what you see, experience what you experience. Otherwise, my research is incomplete. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but you follow orders exactly. No academic curiosity putting you or others at risk. We go together, we stay together, we come back together. Understood? Understood? The journey through the maintenance tunnels took 4 hours, moving slowly to avoid detection. Kess learned what it meant to be afraid in darkness. Every sound a potential threat, every shadow a possible enemy. The humans moved with confidence born of practice, but Kess could sense their tension too. They were afraid, had always been afraid. They simply did not let fear stop them. Marcus led the way, his knowledge of the colony's infrastructure making him invaluable. Rivera watched their back trail, weapon ready, eyes constantly scanning. Sarah coordinated, making decisions about route and timing that kept them undetected. And Kess struggled to keep up, his 3 legs less suited for crawling through confined spaces than human. By the Alessum, the doubt incident. The broadcaster was still transmitting, the signal strong and steady from somewhere above. Sarah established contact through a hardline connection David had rigged, and a voice crackled through with painful clarity. This is Dr. Amara Okonkwo. I'm maintaining distress signal from tower observation deck. Status: functional, but trapped. Ravager patrols pass every hour. How copy? Kess saw Sarah's expression transform, saw something flash across her face that took him a moment to identify. Love, pride, fear, all 3. Simultaneously, Dr. Amara Okonkwo, the colony's chief medical officer. Sarah's wife. Kappa clear. Amara. It's Sarah. We're establishing supply line and evac options. What's your situation? The relief in Amara's voice was palpable, even through the distortion. Sarah, thank God I'm alone up here. Got cut off during initial attack, found the damaged cum array and have been keeping it running. Food nearly gone, water scarce, but I'm managing. Don't risk yourselves for me, not up for discussion. Sarah's voice was gentle but absolute. Supply run is happening now. Evac. When opportunity presents. No arguments. Kes understood then what he was seeing. Sarah had not mentioned that the broadcaster might be her wife. Had organized this mission on principle alone without revealing her personal stake. She had been willing to risk herself for a stranger broadcasting from a tower. That it turned out to be someone she loved did not change the fundamental calculus. She would have done this regardless. They transferred supplies through a maintenance shaft. Enough food and water to last a week. Spare power cells for the communication equipment, medical supplies in case of injury. Amara's hand appeared through the shaft opening, accepting each package with murmured thanks. When Sarah's hand touched hers for a brief moment, Kes saw both women pause. Holding contact for 3 precious seconds before necessity forced them apart, the return journey was faster. Urgency driving them. They had been in hostile territory too long, pushed their luck too far, but they made it back to the bunker without contact. Sliding through the sealed door just as Ravager, patrols began their morning sweep of the maintenance systems. Alina was waiting in the medical bay, treating Michael's shoulder wound and preparing for the next crisis. When Sarah entered, still covered in tunnel dust and carrying empty supply containers, Alina simply nodded. Amara? Safe. Supplied. Still broadcasting. Military response time is now estimated 48 hours instead of 72. She's saving us. She's family, Alina said simply. That's what family does. Kes added this to his notes, but words felt increasingly inadequate. Humans called each other family, even when not related by biology. Called it family when a doctor maintained communications under impossible conditions. Called it family when people risked themselves for strangers. Called it family when they shared food while starving, sang to calm frightened children, treated wounded enemies with care. The Zentari had families too, biological units defined by genetic relationship and social obligation, but they had never extended the concept to encompass everyone within protective reach, had never made it mean anyone I would risk myself to save. Perhaps that was another thing humans understood that his people did not. The 5th day brought the heaviest assault yet. The Ravagers, frustrated by stubborn resistance and missing team members, threw everything they had at the bunker position. 40 raiders, with heavy weapons, cutting equipment, and what appeared to be combat engineering expertise. They meant to end this. To extract whatever value the survivors represented and move on to easier targets. Sarah gathered everyone for what might be a final stand. Humans checked weapons and took positions. Zentari huddled with the children, hoping their non-combatant status might offer protection. Kes stood with his datapad, still documenting, unable to do anything else useful. This is it, Sarah said quietly. They're coming with everything. We've bought all the time we can buy. Military response is still 12 hours out. We need to hold that long. 12 hours is impossible. Marcus stated fact without emotion. We don't have the resources, the manpower, or the defensive depth. Then we make it possible. Sarah's response was steel. We've done impossible things for 5 days. We do it for 12 more hours. For Amara, for the kids, for everyone counting on us. We hold. The humans nodded. The Zentari looked terrified. Kes felt both reactions simultaneously, his 3 hearts beating patterns of fear and something else. Admiration, perhaps? Or horror at what admiration for violence implied about his own civilized philosophy. The assault began with explosive breaches, Ravagers blowing through barriers and flooding into the maintenance tunnels. Marcus's gas traps slowed them minimally, the raiders equipped now with full protective gear. David's electronic countermeasures were bypassed by their combat engineers. Every advantage the defenders had gained was being systematically eliminated. What followed was carnage that Kes would document in clinical detail and remember in nightmares. Humans fought with everything they had, defending positions until they collapsed. Falling back only when continued defense was suicide, reforming lines and fighting again. Rivero went down with a shattered leg, still firing from the ground until Marcus dragged him to safety. James took an energy blast to the chest that should have killed him, but somehow remained conscious. Using his own body to shield 2 Zentari children from incoming fire, Sarah was everywhere. Directing defense, plugging gaps in the lines, pulling back anyone too injured to continue. Kes saw her take a glancing hit that opened her side, saw her pause only long enough to ensure it was not immediately fatal before continuing to fight. Blood ran down her coveralls, but she moved with the same precision, the same terrible grace. The bunker entrance was breached. Raiders poured through, and for a moment Kes thought it was over. But Alina was there. Alina, the teacher who sang lullabies, standing between the children and armored killers, with an improvised shock weapon in steady hands. She dropped the first raider, then the second, buying seconds for others to respond. David appeared from a side passage, tackling a third raider with physical impact that should have shattered human bones, but somehow both of them kept moving, kept fighting. Kes grabbed a Zentari child, one of the youngest, and ran for the secondary fallback position Sarah had prepared days ago. A raider appeared in front of him, weapon raised, and Kes knew he was about to die. Then Marcus was there, weaponless, but throwing his body between the raider and civilians, taking a blast meant for others. He fell, and Kes screamed, but there was no time for anything except running, protecting the child, reaching safety. The secondary position held for 8 minutes before being overrun. The third position held for 5. They were running out of room, out of options, out of time. Sarah had gathered the remaining defenders. Maybe 12 humans still combat capable, and 37 civilians, including Kes, huddled behind their protection. The children were crying now, unable to maintain brave silence. Their fear too great, Sarah raised her weapon for what would probably be the last time, positioning herself at the final choke point. When David's voice crackled through the emergency communication system, coming signal. Military frequency. It's the cavalry. 3 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel with precision that spoke of emergency, protocols, and maximum response speeds. Human military, drawn by Amara's distress signal. Arriving 8 hours early because someone had decided the situation warranted bending regulations about safe system entry speeds, the Ravagers knew what was coming. They broke and ran, abandoning their assault, racing for their ships before military forces could trap them in system. Within 20 minutes, the siege was over. Within 30, medical teams were flooding into the colony with supplies and evacuation procedures. Kes sat in the bunker's ruins, surrounded by the evidence of 5 days fighting, and tried to process what he had witnessed. Marcus was alive, barely, being carried out on a stretcher with Alina holding his hand. Rivera was conscious despite his injuries, joking with the medics about the quality of their pain medication. James, who should have died from the chest blast, was already walking with assistance, refusing to be carried. Sarah had collapsed the moment military forces secured the perimeter, her body finally acknowledging damage she had ignored for days. Medics worked on her with urgent efficiency while she gave them status reports, insisted on checking on everyone else first. Tried to remain in command even while bleeding out on a medical stretcher. Amara descended from the tower, finally extracted, and went straight to Sarah's side. Kes watched through the haze of exhaustion as the 2 women held each other, both crying, both trying to check the other for injuries, both insisting they were fine while covered in blood and trauma. A human military officer, Captain Morrison, approached Kes where he sat documenting everything with shaking fingers. "You're the Zentari researcher, correct?" "Dr. Talvin." "Yes. I need your preliminary report. What happened here? How did 47 civilians hold out for 5 days against organized raiders?" Kes looked at the officer, then at the humans being evacuated, then at his incomplete notes. How did he explain what he had seen? How did he put into words the way Sarah had risked herself for strangers? The way Marcus had transformed from botanist to warrior, the way Alina had stood between children and death without hesitation. "They chose to," Kes said finally. "At every moment when they could have chosen otherwise, could have chosen survival over sacrifice. Safety over heroism, they chose to protect others. That is what happened here. Humans chose to be human." The officer looked puzzled, as if this explanation was inadequate. But Kes had no better words. He had documented every tactical decision, every defensive position, every engagement. But the data meant nothing without understanding the choice behind it. The conscious decision to value others' lives as much as their own. To make family out of strangers. To maintain humanity in the face of inhumanity.